Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, friends. A warm welcome to you to this, our Beijing Plus 30 fireside chat. We're pleased to have you with us this afternoon. We appreciate you spending the time with us, and we hope that you will find this evening's activity engaging. This fireside chat focuses on our young people. It focuses on youth voices in a future in the blue and green economy. As many of you may know, and for those of you who don't know, this year is the 30th commemoration of the Fourth World Conference on Women, also referred to as the Beijing, the landmark moment where we acknowledge the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This was a pivotal turning point in the women's movement in relation to women's equality worldwide. There were many delegates who assembled in Beijing in 1995 and played a pivotal role in setting the course for the women's empowerment movement from then till now. And at this juncture, 30 years later, we are taking a moment not only to recognize the milestone, but also to further call to action what we need to pay attention to in terms of furthering the movement towards gender equality, of which we are still far behind. This year also marks the 15th anniversary of the creation of UN Women, who is your host for this evening. And UN Women is the UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. And this entity was established 15 years ago by the UN General Assembly. And it's an organization that seeks to bring together or to convene stakeholders across our member states to address issues pertinent to gender equality. In this discussion this evening, we're going to be taking a look at the Beijing Action Agenda item number 6, which focuses on climate justice for all women and girls. And it is my pleasure this afternoon to take a back seat and to lead this discussion in the hands of our youth voices. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator for this evening, Yemi Knight, who is the Executive Director of, sorry, one second. My screen's got a bit muddled. Jawara, my screens are doing the crazy thing I told you it does. So, sorry. Yemi Knight is the Executive Director of Anchor Bridge Environmental Inc. and a member of the UN Youth Advisory Group for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. Yemi is a Barbadian advocate for environmental and human rights, dedicated to advancing inclusive and equitable solutions for today's most pressing challenges. As a passionate conservationist and justice-driven leader, Yemi has successfully spearheaded Caribbean environmental and human rights advocacy campaigns. With over 7 years of experience in consulting, research, and project management, they have worked at the intersection of climate justice, human rights, and community resilience, ensuring that marginalized voices are centered in policy and decision-making. They are currently a UN Youth Advisor for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, and their expertise spans disaster risk reduction, environmental justice, and movement building, focusing on empowering vulnerable communities. Yemi's work bridges an activism and strategy, translating grassroots advocacy into impactful policy change. And I welcome Yemi to this evening's conversation, and I hand over to you to guide us through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, for setting us off. Before we get into the meat of the matter, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to everyone on the call, Caribbean youth, young women, and girls here today, along with the esteemed panelists, which I'll introduce shortly, and of course, the UN Women team. To our youth in attendance, you're our region's living hope. You feel the urgency of the changing climate and the opportunity it presents to build an equitable future. Today's topic, Youth Voices on Future and the Blue Economy, is very, very crucial. And we'll span topics such as climate justice, which recognizes that the climate crisis hits women and girls the hardest and fastest, especially in large ocean states like us. But it's also the belief that young women are the most powerful change agents. The voices, the ideas, and the leadership of young women are very essential. And as it pertains to the Beijing platform for action, specifically when it relates to Area 6, which is women and the environment, it states that women and girls are vital in environmental management and must be the center of decision-making for a healthy planet. So I hope that this conversation brings that legacy forward today, right now. And as it pertains to the blue economy, that just refers to blue and green economies. That just refers to the sustainable use of our ocean and building a low carbon and more resource efficient world. These economies are where the careers of the future are built. And most importantly, these are where your engagement is absolutely critical. Our region's survival and prosperity depends on you all in the audience and you all in the panel right now. And so I would like to say that our panelists are living proof of what is possible for our future. These are young Caribbean women, scientists, thought leaders, innovators, founders, and advocates making powerful changes in our world. And first, I would like to introduce Keithlin, who will be sharing a video and then a reflection. A bit about Keithlin. She's the founder and executive director of Helen's Daughters. She's a Caribbean social entrepreneur and advocate for gender equality, sustainable agriculture, and rural development. She founded Helen's Daughter, a St. Lucia-based nonprofit empowering women in agriculture through training, advocacy, and market access in St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Under her leadership, thousands of women have been trained in sustainable agriculture, financial literacy, and agribusiness, making Helen's Daughter a regional leader in transforming agriculture into a viable and dignified livelihood. I'll say this, this was the first time meeting Keithlin, but I've actually heard about her project for about 2 or 3 years now, so I'm actually quite honored to be on a panel discussing and hearing from you, Keithlin. Her work spans across grassroots organizing, movement building, policy and advocacy, and she's been recognized by BBC, National Geographic, and Forbes. She also launched a HD Academy. I've never heard that word before, but I'm sure she'll explain what that is, and is approved as an alternative to the government in good agricultural practices and certification in St. Lucia. Moreover, Keithlin is a Goodwill Ambassador for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture and the only Caribbean national on the Equity Fund Board of Directors. In 2021, she was awarded an MBE for her contributions in agriculture and the advancement of rural women. Without further ado, Keithlin, take the floor. Thank you so much for being here. We're not hearing you, Keithlin, sorry.
Hi, Keithlin. Sorry, you might want to try changing to a different microphone if possible. No, sorry, no, we're still not hearing you.
Jawara, Keithlin had a video that she wanted shown first. Perhaps you can go to the video. Keithlin, perhaps sign out and sign back in quickly. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to play the video now.
In the Caribbean, food isn't just food. It's memory, it's love, it's survival. From the hands that plant the seed to the ones that cook the meal, every step tells a story of resilience, culture, and care. Helen's Daughters is about more than just farming. It's about reclaiming our relationship with food, with the land, and with each other.
Cutting, planting, cutting plantains. I am a farmer's daughter.
We're trying to redefine what agriculture looks like in the Caribbean. Yes, it's women at the forefront, but this work touches on everyone, men, women, children. It's about building stronger communities from the ground up. Through the Nourish Collective, we're shining a light on the stories behind the food, farm to table with a purpose. This is about celebrating our roots, our creativity, and the people who feed us with their hands, their hearts, their history. Helen's Daughters is rewriting the narrative of who leads Caribbean agriculture. Founded in St. Lucia and now operating across 3 Eastern Caribbean countries, we have trained and supported thousands of women to become climate-smart farmers, agribusiness owners, processors, and leaders in their communities. We began with a simple but powerful idea. Women in agriculture deserve more than visibility. They deserve investment, training, and a seat at every table where decisions are made. And we've delivered. From launching our Academy, a certified agricultural training program, to creating women-led farmers markets, farmers markets, and even emergency response systems post-disaster. We've built a movement grounded in dignity, resilience, and economic independence. Our women are supplying hotels, restaurants, exporting products, hosting agritourism experiences, involved in policy shaping within the Caribbean agricultural sphere, and shaping the future of food systems on their own terms. At Helen's Daughters, we don't just grow crops, we grow confidence, we grow community, we grow change.
I believe Keithlin is back with us. Can you try your mic now, please?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, excellent.
Shall I go ahead? Was the video already played?
We just finished the video, so you can go right ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much to UN Women. I do apologize, of course, Murphy's Law at times when you try to get things done. But I really wanted to use this video to anchor this conversation. Essentially, I know that for many young women, the last thing that they think about is going into the agricultural sector. For me, growing up in St. Lucia, I literally came from a family of farmers on both sides. And yet still, it was never presented as a career for me, especially considering my gender and also, I think, considering social status as well. It was merely seen as survival, not aspiration. Yet over time, agriculture has opened my eyes to so much more. As a Black Caribbean woman in particular, I've come to see that agriculture isn't just about food or farming. It bleeds into our history, our culture, our health, and our communities. And this is why women must be at the center of the space. For me, it has been a really personal and moving journey. I have battled with many things in the while growing up, from my weight and some issues with my health. And though I grew up surrounded by agriculture, I never realized the power of food as medicine until I stepped fully into this work. Leaving behind a UN career to pursue this path gave me not only career freedom, but also community and power in community. Agriculture became a place where I could reconnect with my body, my health, and my identity. And we often think about agriculture in such a narrow way. I was also guilty of that. Perhaps maybe you think of it as getting your boots dirty, mud, manual labor, or subsistence, but it is so, so much more than that. In our region in particular, where obesity and diabetes are pressing challenges, agriculture offers solutions. I've worked alongside doctors and herbalists who are now reclaiming our ancestral knowledge, showing us that Western medicine isn't the only way. Herbs that our grandparents and great-grandparents knew about intimately are now part of a billion-dollar nutraceutical industry. Sea moss, for example, has always been a part of our tradition as a superfood. I grew up with it, and today it's at the center of global wellness markets. And yet still, we haven't thoroughly protected our region's intellectual property in protecting areas like sea moss, or even if you have a love for the ocean, maybe one day cultivating your own sea moss farm. These opportunities blend culture, health, and entrepreneurship. Looking at it recently, we just heard that Stush in the Bush, which is an amazing culinary experience in Jamaica, was recognized among the top 50 restaurants in North America that combined organic agriculture, ITAL cooking, because ITAL is vital, and a unique cultural experience to gain global recognition. That's the power of seeing agriculture differently. For some, it may be law and policy. For others, it could just be the love of the ocean or the culinary arts. But each is part of this same ecosystem of possibility. That is why, for me, I feel that agriculture has raised me in ways I've never expected it to. It has given me health, it has given me freedom, and most importantly, it has given me community. And I believe it can do the same for so many others. When we know the people who grow our food, when they care about what they put into your food, that's health, but not just health, it's justice and it's resilience. So my reflection is very simple. Don't look at agriculture as just farming or food. Look at it as a space of innovation, of healing and freedom. For me, it is where culture meets climate and community. And it is a space, most importantly, where women are needed and where young women in particular must lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reflection, Keithlin. This is a little known fact about me. I used to be a hydroponic farm manager some years ago, and the options that were made available for women in agriculture in Barbados were so limited to the point that it was a narrative that women and girls don't want to engage in agriculture, even though they are the backbones and of our society. The nourishers of our society. So thank you so much. And I hope that the work that you do continues to bring about change and can also, expand beyond the 3 countries that you are working with. So thank you so much, Keithlin. I'll move into the next segment of today's discussion. So we'll hear from our panelists. We'll get some advice from them. We'll learn about how they got involved in the climate justice and blue and green economy space. And then afterwards, I'll leave some space for the audience to answer some questions or share some reflections. First, I'll introduce our esteemed panelists. So first is Rodrina Daly, who is a project intern for Girls Care. She is an architectural designer and advocate for sustainable design and urban planning for climate resilience in the Caribbean. She is a fellow with Local Pathways Sustainable Development Solutions Network under the UN, dedicated to Goal 6 for the SDGs. And when you get to talking, Rodrina, I hope you can say what Goal 11 is, sorry. She also is an award-winning visual artist and the Peggy Anthrobus awardee, advising at the intersection of climate, youth, gender justice through organizations like Jamaica Climate Change. Our next panelist is Ashley Lashley, who is a passionate advocate for climate, health, and youth empowerment. She serves as a youth advisor to the UN Secretary General on climate change and is a former UNICEF youth advocate, CARICOM ambassador, and former Miss World Barbados. At 16, she founded the Hey campaign, which has grown through her foundation into the world's largest youth-led movement on climate and health. She also founded EcoFit Youth, leads the National Disaster Readiness Project Safe Coast Build, and founded the Small Island Developing States Global Children and Youth Action Summit. In 2025, she became the youngest commencement speaker at the St. George's University and received Barbados Top Ministers Award. She is also the founder and executive director of the Ashley Lashley Foundation. The next panelist is Adia Daniel, who is a 17-year-old climate activist from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and a student studying law, biology, and chemistry. Wow, that's a lot, which is good. Her advocacy includes her role as a chief commissioner guide with the St. Vincent and Grenadine Girl Guide Association. She also serves as a Caribbean youth mental health focal point for St. Vincent and the Grenadines with Let's Unpack It and with UNICEF, and is the co-author of Mental Health. Sorry, I messed that up. I messed that up. She is the youth mental health focal point for St. Vincent and the Grenadines with UNICEF, and is the co-author of a mental health resource kit with Let's Unpack It. Adia was also president for her high school's peer counselor association, and in 2024 she was appointed to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Advisory Council on Youth in Climate Change sectorial group, and works with organizations like UNICEF and Unite 2030. So I'll jump straight into the questions, and I hope you all are ready. My first question is for Ashley, actually. Ashley and Rodrina, and you both can decide who goes first, but how would you define climate justice and what does it mean for your work?
I'll take on for the team. I'll go first. Thank you so much, Yemi, for the wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Rodrina, and I am here on behalf of Girls Care, that is Girls for Climate Action, Resilience, and Empowerment today. What is climate justice and what does it mean for my work? Well, for one, because we are a woman leading or girl leading organization, it firstly means equity. For us, I personally would define climate justice as the recognition that the climate crisis is not just an environmental issue, but it's also an economic issue. It's a social issue. And it acknowledges that those who contribute the least, and not just in the context of us in the global south, but in terms of our communities, women, children, those who contribute the least, the elderly, the disabled, the low-income communities, all of us that, encompass this idea of marginalized, they are often, or we are often rather, the most deeply impacted. For me, climate justice means ensuring that the solutions to the crisis are equitable, they're inclusive, and they're responsive to the lived realities of these groups. Because the truth is that we're all impacted, there is always one of us, somebody in our community going through something climate related. And so in our work at Girls Care, climate justice shows up in the programs that we implement across communities. So we have our annual mentorship program that is dedicated to enveloping young women and young advocates into the climate justice space, creating a network of women who are already actively doing the work and pairing them with young women who are interested in getting to know how it is that we break into this sector, how it is that they themselves can give of themselves for their communities and for their countries and for those who are impacted that are close to them as well. So that's firstly in our mentorship program. And secondly, it shows up again when we do special projects like the one happening right now, Envisioning Resilience, which is a photojournalism project. Essentially, we empower young women, giving them the opportunity to tell stories through photojournalism, capturing these images so that when they come back to us or when they enter the rooms in which they're oftentimes underrepresented, they have visual evidence of the impacts of climate change and how people are, adapting in this world, how it is that, smaller communities, we're talking farming communities, fishing communities, how they're adapting and overcoming it. So it's about storytelling for us. It's about bringing attention to those who are often overlooked in our young women, in our girls, in the disabled, in the elderly. It's about pointing the camera towards them and giving them the platform to tell what climate justice means to them, essentially. And so Girls Care is just proud to be able to platform that in general.
Thank you so much for that, Rodrina. I'm going to jump straight to Ashley and to give your insight.
Thanks, Yemi. Thanks to UN Women for having me here today. It's always great to see Keithlin and Rodrina and Addie, I call her Addie, participating in discussions like these that are meaningful to the future landscape of young women and even young men when it comes to climate justice. And like Rodrina would have said, I totally agree that when you're looking at climate justice, it had so many different intersections. But for me, as a youth advocate representing my island Barbados on the international stage and participating in a few COPs, I would say that climate justice firstly means fairness. Secondly, it means equity. And thirdly, it means dignity. And most of the persons that are on the call come from small island developing states like Barbados. So when I speak to fairness, equity, and dignity, I think that for climate justice coming from a small island developing state, that's what climate justice represents and means for all of us, because it's not about recognizing that world climate change, and we've heard this over and over again, is a universal crisis, that the impacts, as we've heard even with Keithlin's presentation, are not felt equally, nor are the responsibilities for addressing it are shared evenly when we're looking at developed countries and developing countries. But what we've recognized over the years is that those who contribute less to the crisis overall, especially youth, women, and those for marginalized communities, especially persons living with disabilities in the global south, are often the ones who are suffering the severe consequences. And for our region across the Caribbean, we're recognizing that the increase in weather events, well, extreme weather events to be exact, for example, hurricanes, for example, droughts, and we're recognizing that across the Caribbean, food insecurity is also a major problem. What occurs is that when you're also looking at climate justice, you also have to encapsulate the mental well-being of people, especially those persons from developing and least developed countries across the world. But in my work as a youth advocate and also the executive director of the Ashley Lashley Foundation, over the years, I've recognized that climate justice cannot be just a concept, but it's the foundation to our work as young activists in the climate change space. Because climate justice, and when we talk about climate justice, it truly influences or has the potential to develop and to influence how we as young people design initiatives and how we as young people add our voices to existing conversations and in existing spaces. So I remember 3 years ago, through the Ashley Lashley Foundation, my team and I, in collaboration with some of our partners, recognized that very little climate finance were going to youth-led projects. And I wanted to do something about that as a young woman coming from the Caribbean. Because many youth-led projects on climate change and even the intersection on health were not directly being supported, or those resources wasn't being channeled to youth-led projects. So together we came up with the Hey Global Climate Fund to provide financing to support youth-led projects, not only in the Caribbean, but also across the world, for example, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and Latin America, and we've funded several projects on. And what we've recognized is that the projects in which we have supported does have a gender lens and a gender focus embedded into it. I think one of my favorite projects to date that we would have supported is a project in Indonesia where in a indigenous community, the youth that had presented the project had highlighted that for pregnant mothers, because of where they are situated in Indonesia, the clinics that they have are often shut down by 6 p.m. And the women who are pregnant are not able to access, if they're in labor, get to hospitals in certain period, well, that night period. So the youth team would have designed a solar panel bot so that the doctor or the nurse who is present within their community can have access to some form of electricity to deliver the baby safely. So that was one. And I mean, I can go on and go on and go on for this for days in talking about the work that we do on this intersection and what climate justice means. But even in looking at the Conference of Parties, my first opportunity to attend COP was actually in Glasgow. And it was a very remarkable opportunity for me as a young woman because I was actually given the opportunity through the government of Barbados to be on the official delegation. And I tell young people this every single day who are like, I want to become a climate activist. I want to go to the Conference of Parties. If you don't have a plan, and if you don't have a plan, one, and if you just want to go for the fun of it, then don't go. Because the Conference of Parties, for me, in my opinion, well, when I went in Glasgow, it was very hard to navigate the landscape because there's so many different there's so many different activities, so many different side events. Governments are participating in negotiations. If you're not a negotiator, even for us in the Caribbean, there needs to be a heightened level of capacity building for youth negotiators at a national level. Then it really doesn't make sense for you to go to the Conference of Parties if you don't have a key focus area. But I remember one thing that stood out for me in Glasgow was that the mentorship that I received from the Barbados delegation and the the lead negotiators that was present, but also seeing how CARICOM had its own pavilion as well. I really welcome key discussions with youth voices on that. And I remember too that I was always thinking about what I can do to feel that I'm welcome or being how my voice can be present within the space. And I remember that was my first time that I was introduced to Selwyn Hart, who is the special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Climate Action. And it was just a random introduction because he's also Barbadian. And we exchanged contacts, and I went back to my hotel, and I texted him the morning time of the next day and was like, Mr. Hart, I think that we should have a youth roundtable discussion to really understand what the UNFCCC process is, the work that you're focusing on as a special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General, because young people want to know that we as advocates sometimes don't always have all the information or at hand, and we don't know what governments, private sector, or other civil society organizations at time are working on. So to bring young people from across small island developing states and the Caribbean together to have a discussion with you, I think that would be pivotal. And he was in agreement. And in a day, I was able to pull together over 25 young people at the Conference of Parties my first year to meet with him to have these discussions. And since then, he's been continuing it. And actually, the following year in Dubai, there was the first ever children and youth pavilion. So when it comes to climate justice and youth, I would say now there's a major role for youth to play. But I think we as young people have to be planners, and we really need to know what we want to achieve when we're going and when we're participating in these international conversations and discussions. Because as I mentioned, equity is key, fairness is key, and dignity is what we as young people should strive for in advocating for the necessary climate justice. So I know probably, Yemi, that was a lot, but I'll stop there.
No, that's all good. It was very, very good reflection from both you and Regina. And Rodrina, sorry for mispronouncing your name. But what I heard, and I'll repeat what you just said, Ashley, right? Which is fairness, equity, and dignity. And Rodrina brought up the theme of having marginalized people be their own voice, be their own leaders within the space. And that's quite important. And I like that you both shed light on localized efforts, but also regional, and then on your from your perspective, Ashley, global perspective, as in it's important to mirror grassroots work, grassroots initiatives with global initiatives. And Ashley, I do like what you said about COP. I remember my first COP, which was Dubai, and it's good to know that there was a Barbadian who was the catalyst for the youth platform, pavilion. When I went there, I also was running around like a chicken I had no idea what to do. I was just tossed into it. And it is very crucial to build the capacities of youth so that they can become negotiators and change makers at a global level. So mirroring the work that Rodrina does from a localized and regional perspective with this international impact is very, very important. I also want to note something else that Rodrina said, which was about coalition building and intergenerational conversations. There are a lot of people who have might even be the same age as and older, who have years of experiences, and they can absolutely, within reason, provide the tools and the guidance that young people or people who are just starting might not have. Because I like to call myself a late bloomer in the space. I started when I was a lot older than most youth advocates, and I've learned so much in the last 2 years, and I couldn't have done that without mentorship of peers my age, some people younger and some people a lot older. I will move on to the next question, which I will direct to Adia. I met Adia about 2 weeks ago in Jamaica. And I didn't know much about Adia until I read this bio. And that is, again, quite impressive. You see young people who are doing really impressive things at such a young age. So for you, Adia, I want to know, first of all, what was is a double barrel question, but what was your academic journey into this space? And then now that you're in this space, do you see a lot of young women thinking of careers in this space? Adia.
Thank you, Yemi, and thank you to everyone so far for your very insightful and diverse interventions. Well, as Yemi would have read, I'm 19 now though, not 17 anymore, but I did do biology, chemistry, and law at the community college here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A very diverse portfolio, one that sparks a lot of questions whenever I say, hey, I did biology, chemistry, and law. But I think it really stems from my passion for, one, policy analysis, two, the natural sciences, and three, my natural nature of advocacy and being in the advocacy space, right? And I think it's really important for us to back the work that we do. While our certificates and our academics may not be the first thing that people look at, it really does give you, one, evidence-based solutions and a evidence-based thought process, as well as it gives you the actual knowledge that you need. While lived experiences and lived realities are just as important, right? So whether it be, I like to call myself bilingual in science and policy and advocacy, right? But beyond that, I think I've also prepared myself very well in terms of collaborating with international organizations like UNICEF, of course. I do a lot of underground community work in project management, and just hands-on experience in climate advocacy, whatever advocacy realm I may be in at the moment, right? For your second question, do I see a lot of girls or young women in this career space? Of course. But how do we foster that environment? How do we create an avenue or avenues for a young woman to feel like, hey, I can go into agriculture. I can go into this sector. And it's not just about doing what you love. It's also, forgive me, but it's also about paying the bills, right? And in small island developing states, we have an issue where our sustainable livelihoods, um, jobs or creation of jobs are just not as good as the regular traditional job that may be on the market, right? So how do we now balance um, the diverse ecosystem and biodiversity that we have here in small island developing states in the Eastern Caribbean, as well as making sure that the sector is solid enough to offer that avenue for young women, right? We have children, we have families. You have to think about the different dynamics. There are single mothers, single parents, right? And I do see the tide shifting, right? It is shifting. For example, through Girl Guides, we have a very strong Girl Guides movement here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And it's truly where my advocacy started. And I really have to pinpoint that every single time that I've seen firsthand how proper mentorship and visibility where internationally recognized days of advocacy are concerned. That's how we get into things, right? And it sparks interest in these different fields. And so we have these groups where we're nurturing young women to become their best selves. And I think that's really an avenue that we can tap into, right? The NGOs, the MPOs, to push our government to have policies that include young women and young girls, right? And I think it opens a door. I believe our role as youth, me as a young woman, is now to open those doors wider. What are we saying? What are we looking at? What are the different angles that we can tackle this? Because while we can sit here and say that we need this policy, we need to be inclusive, we also have to think of the practicality, right? Because it's governance at the end of the day. And I think what we need to do is just include ourselves in the conversations, push ourselves into the rooms, right? Where we don't need a seat at the table. We are the table. Why? Because this is our future. These are our sustainable livelihoods. If I have the idea to, just like Helen's Daughter Foundation, I believe, to do something like that, how can it thrive in the economies that we have? So these are the different things that we need to think of. And I just think having a seat at the table is not merely enough. I mean, we have to think about tokenism, right? It's not just about having a youth at the table or a young girl at the table, but it's actually about hearing the lived experiences and what we want and what can be inclusive of us, right? So I really think that's just how we can interject ourselves there on the policy side, because policy is supposed to be very personal at the end of the day, right? Because policy is practical, yes, but it's also the result of how we live. So it's lived experiences. So I just think interjecting ourselves, and of course, we have to challenge our governments and the intersectoral organizations that we're a part of. What are you doing to place us at the table in a meaningful way?
Thank you so much for that, Adia. You know, it's just really refreshing and also humbling in a sense to see young women in the Caribbean be so driven, so focused, and being the leaders in this space. I think it goes back to what Ashley was saying, is that the voices of the individuals who are most impacted. Sorry, this was Rodrina that said this. The voices of the people who are most impacted are the ones leading the change. So it's almost interesting how, while suffering or while having the negative experiences of the current climate crisis, you will also have to be the beacon of hope, the leader, the voice, and all these things. And I think it goes back to something you were saying just now, Adia, which is while doing that work, you also have to sustain yourself, right? You also have to sustain yourself while trying to help sustain the lives of other people. And it goes back to that thing that Ashley mentioned, which is dignity within this work, fairness and dignity within this work. And it's something you didn't necessarily say, but your skill set, the qualifications that you do have, right, which is bio law, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing more and more that people who have that all-round experience is actually a lot advantageous in the climate space, because climate finance speaks to law, speaks to economics, speaks to also understanding justice and all that. So that's also a very, very, very good insight that you gave this audience. There's so many things that you all mentioned. I'm trying to make sure I summarize them all, but all I can say, I believe that the Caribbean is in good hands with you all. I do have more questions to answer. I'll get into those, and we do have about 15 more minutes left for this particular segment before we go into the next session. Oh, sorry, I want to also mention something that you said, just reiterate something you said, Adia, which is evidence, right? We need evidence. We always hear that the Caribbean is data poor, and you made a very important note to say that without evidence, sometimes it's difficult to have a foundation to advocate off of. So that is also quite important, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'll leave the floor open to all individuals here, because I'm realizing that a lot of your backgrounds intersect with each other. And my question, yes, would be, so we spoke about the possibilities, we spoke about what you all have been doing, but I want you to tell me what these barriers have been. And you can get as real as you can. What have been the barriers in this particular space? And I'll leave that question open to everyone. And then I'll move on to another question, which is the solutions, right? And so that we can have a balanced conversation. So you all can choose who answers that question. I don't want to call names.
I guess I can start it off. I would say, as it relates to the barriers that I or my foundation or other youth that we engage with have faced is, I would say the biggest barrier is always access to finance. Always access to, well, finance one, access to training opportunities that are interested for young people. I find a lot of the curricula in which young people go to for capacity building or training sessions are often too low, and is a lot to take in, sometimes in a day to 3-day training, and there needs to be a heightened level of more field trips or less academic or theory being inculcated into the overall programs. But I think for a lot of young people, it is access to those decision-making spaces. And I could agree to some extent with what Adia would have mentioned in noting that we are the table. We've recognized that young people do have remarkable ideas. Young people have a big voice when it comes to addressing issues on climate justice and climate change and the environment and so many other societal issues that we're facing, whether it's economic, whether it's environmental, whether it's societal. But there are plenty young people who don't know where to start. who might have a great idea but don't know where to access support. A lot of the young people who are pushed to do stuff to date or politically affiliated. And there are many young people from grassroots communities who don't have access to the resources that they need to expand their businesses or, again, even know how to start. So cultural perceptions as well can also act as barriers that influence how young people go about their leadership, their innovation, because that at times are often undervalued or overlooked. So I would say those would be some of the barriers that I have witnessed. And I think that that's where mentorship comes into play. There's still a lot of young people today within our educational system who still wants to follow the traditional path of becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer. And while I agree that every single job has its place within society, we really need to make the environmental landscape and what we're teaching young people more creative, more fun, being able to tell stories and even the policies in a way that translates to children from primary schools into secondary schools into tertiary schools. The way we communicate to all of those age groups are totally different. So I would say that is one of the biggest barriers that I think policymakers have as well, is that they don't know how to communicate to young people as well. So I'll stop there because I see Rodrina and Keithlin have their hands up.
Thank you so much, Arthur. You just gave us so much food for thought. And I'll respond quickly because I know that Rodrina and Keithlin are going to give me a lot to respond to. But I like what you said about not knowing where to go and not having the access. And I can speak from my own experience. And we keep speaking about marginalized groups. The more marginal you are, the more difficult it is to access these spaces. So I did LGBTQ organizing in the beginning, and I remember the pushback I got when I entered certain policy making rooms, whereby my policy efforts would be more accepted overseas than within my region. So absolutely, Ashley, I agree with you on that regard. And then you also spoke about providing practical and tangible hands-on training that isn't necessarily academically focused. You can learn the theory, yeah? But if you don't know how to apply it in real life, then the training becomes fruitless. So you're absolutely right about that. I saw Keithlin's hand first, and but then you put it down. So you can go ahead first, Keithlin, and then we'll go to you, Regina.
Thank you so much, Yemi, and I hope my mic is working now. But honestly, everyone, I'm really loving the contributions. And I really like Yemi, Ashley in particular, Adia as well. Everything resonates with me, but I have to say, I quite agree, Ashley. In our region, a lot of, especially development initiatives, tend to be politically motivated at times. So certain politically aligned persons will be pushed forward. And I experienced that having left St. Lucia for school and coming back. It was like, who's this girl? Who's she with? And so forth. And one of the things I recognized was, honestly, the easiest, not the easiest, but the best way to essentially bypass that is to create a sustainable model. And like Adia mentioned, to create a sustainable model, you need funding, you need money. And the only way I was able to come back home was literally in the form of a fellowship. So fellowships like Ashoka and Echoing Green, they fund you as a social entrepreneur to be able to focus on your development initiative, which in a sense allows you to be able to focus on that initiative without getting into the noise of politics and so forth and what affiliations you have. I think that's a big thing. And I think also the funding structure in the Caribbean is a limitation. It's something that I've been constantly advocating for. We have a very traditional, in my opinion, primordial way of funding development initiatives that's charity-based and not philanthropy-based. The rest of the world has left charity. Philanthropy is the only way that we can sustain our long-term initiatives. So when you see Adia and Rodrina and Ashley's initiatives, I don't look at them as projects. They need to be organizations. And honestly, the third sector, the nonprofit, the social enterprise sector has to be strengthened outside of government. So we have to find persons, organizations that can tap in, that can not just give you funding for a project for 6 months or a year, but multi-year funding, so that you're not just doing this just to meet the short-term outcomes, but you have long-term goals. And I think for me, that has been something I've been really passionate about pushing. I'm also trying to do the work in trying to influence and invite more types of philanthropy types of funding into the Caribbean region. But also, as a region, our leaders also have to advocate for this as well. I think that we need to recognize when we're getting, whether it's foreign development funding and so forth, what types are we getting? How are we essentially empowering those change makers on the ground to not just complete short-term projects, but to build on organizations that last past our generation? Thanks, Yemi.
Thank you so much. It's interesting because as you all are speaking, I'm finding so much similarities in the story. I was educated overseas and then I moved back and I found myself in the same position as you, Keithlin. And I also want to remark on what Ashley said earlier about it was Adia, my bad, when you said job opportunities within the region, right? A lot of you, it seems, had to invent your own jobs in order to sustain yourselves financially in the region. So it'd be good to see more opportunities for women and girls in the blue and green economy that are in line with what's going on overseas. Like, the landscape is changing. You also mentioned something which is philanthropy-based funding. So I have two things I want to know. The Caribbean Youth Climate Council is trying to start a fund. And if everybody on this call could get in touch with the Caribbean Youth Climate Council and figure out how they plan to go about that fund, because it's good to have collaboration. You don't want one organization to do it. It's good to have collaboration because it shows that there are more people on the ground who are pushing for a particular thing. Another thing is that I did a bit of research with an organization called Restless Development, and they found that less than 5% of climate funding, climate finance, doesn't really matter, less than 5% goes towards youth initiatives and enterprises. So that is the reality. And you have to imagine that that number is even more smaller for Caribbean youth because we're often left out of conversations and discussions at a high level. So I'll leave the floor open to ask this question to Rodrina. And then because of the interest of time, Rodrina, you'll answer this question, and then we'll leave the floor open to audience. So audience, you can write your questions in the chat and direct them to a particular individual, or I don't know if they have the capacity to open their mics. So I'm sure you can only ask the questions in the chat and direct them to a particular individual, and we'll go through that. So Rodrina, please take the floor.
Right. Thank you so much once again, everyone. And I wanted to piggyback off of something Ashley said when she talked about cultural perception being a barrier in and of itself. And it immediately made me think, what would my mother, who is a 56-year-old poultry farmer, even think blue and green economy is? Because I'm thinking back to when I was in high school and choosing a career path, and she said, listen, know where you come from and where you want to go, because it's important that you don't end up where you start, living in an inner city community. So if I was supposed to go to her today and say, Mommy, what do you think the blue and green economy is? Immediately she'd come to some conclusion of it being just about, fishing and farming. And I think that is a perception that we need to change. We as advocates, we as activists, we're more than that. We are scientists, we're architects, we're urban planners. The blue and green economy means so much more. And I love how Adia had framed it, So it's important for us to jump over that hurdle and create a wider perception of what, environmental conservation and sustainability looks like. And I did promise Yemi I'd tell her what the SDSN Youth Goal 11 is. So Goal 11 under the SDGs is centered around creating sustainable cities and communities. And so my work outside of Girls Care is focused on sustainable urban planning and how it is that we're going to create cities that not just grow with us as a population, across the Caribbean, but grows sustainably. Cities that are climate resilient, cities that are greener, cities that serve us as communities rather than just, cars, because a lot of the times the way our communities and our cities are designed is to cater to vehicular traffic rather than people who actually live and work within the cities. So that was what SDG 11 is all about. And it was funny to me entering the program because it is a year-long fellowship. It was in a similar setting like this because it is a global fellowship. And I opened my mic and I said, is anybody else here from the Caribbean? And there was no one else there, and I feel like having the accessibility to a global platform, but still having your community within the global platform is so, so, so important. Because consider a shared project where we're tackling, cities within the Caribbean, and I'm the only representative there. There is nobody to turn to say, hey, this makes sense, or in the context of Barbados or in the context of Trinidad. So we have to look at places outside of the Caribbean, with similar climates, with similar structures. Within the Caribbean, our cities are so small. Jamaica, Kingston is just over 600,000. It represents one of the larger cities in the Caribbean. So having our community within the global community is so, so, so very much important. And that is why I have to bring up back this idea of mentorship, which is what Girls Care is about and is what Ashley talked about as well. Because having somebody to turn to within the community or within this community of care that we're trying to create is so vital, because the feeling of isolation when you enter certain rooms where you're often not welcomed into, or you are welcomed into it as an afterthought, having that community that you can fall back on and that network, it's so, so vital in bringing all our projects to life, whether it be storytelling, mentorship, or farming communities. Having that community that we've established on calls like this, where we can say, hey, we need some climate finance, where can I turn to get all of that advice? It is so fundamental for us, especially in such a tight-knit Caribbean community.
Thank you so much, Rodrina. Truer words have never been spoken before. Well, I am going to give some time for the questions to roll in, but I just want to address a couple of things for you from what you said, and something that came out to me, which is that a lot of Caribbean cities and islands were designed with a history, right? We have a colonial history, and most of our design reflects that. Some of the issues that we're experiencing with urban development, heat waves, et cetera, all have to do with the designs that we inherited that had no idea that we, as the people of our complexion, would be, in leading, guiding, and making, being the leaders of our own community. So I really like that you mentioned that. And then you mentioned mentorship, and I just want to, say this again, like you're mentioning intergenerational mentorship, but there's also peer-to-peer mentorship. Because right now, y'all don't know it, but y'all are giving me so much insight and information, and it's this conversation is truly inspiring. I know you hear that a lot on all of these conversations, but I'm genuinely inspired by this conversation. So thank you all so much for that. I want to ask our IT individual, or Angela, if any questions have come through from the audience. I'm not seeing them on my end.
Hi, Yemi. Sorry, at the moment, no questions from. Well, there is a hand raised by someone in the audience. I can allow them to talk if that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
So good
Go ahead.
evening, and thank
Right.
you for, is it okay to speak now? Yes, great. So good evening again. My name is Terry Ince. I'm with the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. And thank you all for, UN Women, of course, for putting on this forum, and also for all of this eloquent speakers that have really addressed climate justice in your own way. So I have two questions, and the first part of the question is for my sister from Jamaica. And then the second part of the question is for anybody who wishes to answer. So I was really intrigued by your focus on sustainable housing and what you just mentioned, Rodrina, about the way our cities in the Caribbean are designed, or were designed, and we have inherited a design that is not sustainable to us today. And so I wanted to, and I'm really intrigued in hearing what your idea is of a more sustainable housing scheme or development, or just, you know, a layout that not only include walking, because, you know, I'm a big proponent of that. So walkable streets, but also, but the reality is we also have cars, and we have buses, and we have all the other modes of transportation, bikers, for instance, bike lanes. So I just kind of want to get a sense of your idea of what that could look like in your world, in our world, I should say, not your world, in our world, in the very near future, hopefully. And the second part of the question is, it's for any of you to answer, and it's about mentorship. I know that Ashley mentioned it. I heard Ashley mention it, or Drina, maybe all of you mentioned it, but the idea of you all experiencing barriers, of course, for young people really being at the table in a meaningful way. Keithlin mentioned that, Ashley mentioned that, so meaningful engagement. How are you now ensuring that the next generation is meaningfully engaged right now? So what are you doing in your respective spaces to ensure that they don't run into the barriers that you have experienced or are continuing to experience? So again, two questions, and Rodrina, you can start, and then whoever else wants to answer the second part, I look forward to your response. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I relish the opportunity to give an idea of what my ideal future, at least for us, would look like. Firstly, there is a term we use in architecture called the vernacular. And what that basically means is anything you can find, anything that's close to you, what's in your environment. Because what we've adapted here in the Caribbean is what they call the modern trifecta. That's the concrete, steel, and glass. So those materials, you go and you see them on every government building, you go down the road, you build a house from them. But that was adapted. You know, it's the same way we can say, even the way our cities are laid out, the layouts of our cities are colonial. You know, Jamaica, or Kingston rather, has a great pattern which was adapted from the British. So every aspect of how we have created community is colonial. So it's up to us to decolonize that. We can take the first step by adapting vernacular architecture. That means looking what we have, you know, in proximity to us in terms of materials. That's the limestone, that's the bamboo, and using it to create architecture that will hold up in the Caribbean or the tropical context, you know, things that provide accurate, adequate shading for the heavy sunshine that we receive, you know, things that are hurricane resistant, earthquake resistant, but do not conform to the modern trifecta. So firstly, adapting vernacular. Secondly is restricting urban sprawl. And what I mean by that is, as our population grows and grows, and you realize that our cities are getting bigger, like whether that means that, you know, more people are moving in through migration, or that means that naturally our birth rate is increasing and people are flocking towards the cities and choosing to build their homes, and, you know, because of access to services or access to healthcare, sanitation, all of that tend to be, you know, better upkept within the cities. regardless of the reason, it is important that we restrict urban sprawl. So instead of allowing our cities to fan out as more people enter, it's important that we build upwards. So I know for a lot of people, they say skyscrapers or multi-story buildings don't make sense on such small islands, but it is important that as we try to conserve the green environment or mountains or hills or green spaces, that as we build up, we do it mixed use. So that means not just having residential sections in one building, but incorporating commercial. We tend to do commercial on the ground floors and then having residentials on the multi-story buildings going up. So that way we can share the space, and then even a rooftop garden. So in that one building, you have such a multifaceted opportunity for not just, creating a space that is closer to home. Yemi could work downstairs and live upstairs. So that reduces commute, that reduces the amount of transportation, the emissions that will be put out by vehicular traffic, improving our transportation system so that we as people don't have a reliance on cars. And we have created a holistic, walkable city that will not only, reduce or reliability or reduce our need for vehicular traffic, but increase health-wise. Because if you have a walkable city, if you know that your gym is just down the road, if you know that the restaurant is right across the street, you're encouraged to walk. So those are the things that would, impact or rather push for a more sustainable city and a more sustainable community, and incorporating all of this with green energy, the wind, the solar. I could go on forever, but I want to move on to the second part of your question, which has to do with mentorship. What we can do right now is be the first. We can be the first. Everyone in this room can be the first. Ashley started her foundation. We've at Girl Scout are doing our mentorship program, to facilitate young women coming in. Because if we are now the first, they have someone else to look to. You're no longer scared about being that first person in the room and turning around and wondering who is going to be here to support me. So creating that system already in place, being the foundation blocks, that's what we're doing right now in order to support the advocates coming up and the young women coming up into the space.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Regina. I think I just want to answer the second question in regard to mentorship. And I think, I can only speak to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? And over the past 5 years, we've really seen the need to make youth a priority. It's now a priority for our government. I would like to say that it may be for political gain, but the point is that we're now focusing on youth, right? And I think there are many programs. Honestly, I think we've done a good job, because right now we're in the space where we're reviewing a lot of our climate documents, our climate initiatives, and so on. Our NAPs, our NDCs, our climate strategy documents, everything is being reviewed now, right? And I think recently, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Environmental Fund, they had a Youth Ocean Academy, right? Where it was the first cohort, it was the first initiative where it was meant to engage youth, build environmental awareness, teach them the necessary skills where marine science and so on are concerned. And I think that goes back to a point that we were making earlier about barriers, right? We have women and young girls in the sector, but doing the grassroots community work and so on, but where are they in the technical spaces? Do you know what I mean? Where are they in the technical spaces? How are we giving them the avenue to represent us at international meetings in regional spaces, right? We recently launched, in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, what we call YASIP, which is the Youth Agriculture Internship Program, right? Under the Zero Hunger Trust Fund, where it gives young people hands-on training in agriculture. So there is work being done. I'm actually very, very proud of our advancements recently, where climate action is concerned. But in terms of what we can do now, for me, it looks like collaboration because I'm pretty young still, right? For me right now, it looks like collaboration, definitely with ministries, with NGOs, with NPOs, within the organizations that I already work with. For me right now, it's just about collaboration, getting the idea that youth are, we want to be actively involved, and we need to be actively involved, not just in a tokenistic way, but in a meaningful way. With that, you take our lived realities and our perspectives seriously. And I think in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at least, we've really been doing a good job at that recently, especially with the establishment of our Prime Ministerial Youth Advisory Council. So that's just my bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adia. I won't make any reflections. I just want to know if the other panelists want to interject. And so I'll give you a couple seconds if you want to. If you don't, I'll move on to the question or statement that was in the chat. Okay, it seems like there's the panelists, both Rodrina and Adia, did a good job answering Terry's question. So in the chat, someone named Dahlia Show said, "Good evening, everyone. After listening to all the stories being shared, it's amazing how we have some women at this level. Despite the progress within the hierarchy of society when it comes to gender roles, our voices as females and youth, these individuals are becoming more fundamental and critical to decision making. I believe as women, we need to focus as well into self-entrepreneurship, which is the way to go and for a brighter future." So that's what they said. The person is basically giving compliments. And Terry also said, "Excellent. Thank you, Rodrina and all, for responding to my questions. I'm a huge fan of multi-use buildings and walkable cities." And she signed off saying, "Terry is a part of the CEDAW committee for Trinidad and Tobago." I guess while I wait, I want to say one or two things, which is that I forgot to echo Keithlin's conversation about funding, which is that further to that, Keithlin, that trust-based and on restricting funding is the way to go. And I think a lot of you all in this conversation would benefit from that. And Rodrina mentioned being the sole voice as a Caribbean person. That is an issue that we see, but again, you all are making strides and change to shift that. And I hope that in this conversation about mentorship, you all become the individuals who pull more people into these spaces, giving opportunity for people besides yourself to also be a part of the discussion, because all of you all are a part of climate justice, but you all have different expertise. Somebody's in agriculture, somebody's in policy, Rodrina does architecture. All of these different mindsets and different skill sets facilitate more inclusive and expansive solutions, right? We can't have one voice, we can't have one trap-minded solutions. I also like what Adia said about collaboration. So mentorship and a step further collaboration, as in mentorship can be peer-to-peer, but mentorship can also come from people who are already elders, people who are older than us that are already in those specific job sets within the political space, giving mentorship to younger individuals. Do any panelists have something else they want to say? If not, I will hand this discussion over to Angela to close up.
Thank you so much, Yemi. And thank you to our panelists and discussants this evening. I have a question about something that I haven't heard mentioned as a part of this discourse. And I open this up to anyone on the panel to share any reflections that they have in relation to disaster risk reduction. When we talk about climate, we talk about climate change and adverse climate events. We can't forget the fact that women and girls still are disproportionately impacted by many of the challenges that are faced as a result of these adverse climatic events. We also need to continue to be cognizant of the fact that as small island developing states, we are very vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. And as we reflect on climate justice and climate change and what does it mean, outside of securing education, livelihoods, being a part of advocacy, voices, and initiatives, just in two sound bites, if any of you can share any of your reflections or perceptions with respect to that vulnerability that climate change is bringing to us from a disaster perspective. Some of our islands were very badly hit last year by Hurricane Beryl. You may wish to reflect on that. So that would be interesting for me to hear, because when we talk about those working in the blue and green economy, they're also the economies that are at high risk of vulnerability when it comes to climate change and its impacts. So grateful to hear any key thoughts that you have as we wrap up. Keithlin, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thanks for bringing that up. Actually, that aspect, disaster risk and preparedness is really close to my heart, because obviously when you're working in the agricultural sector, climate change and its impacts is everything. It's not just the environment, it's literally your income and your livelihood. So I found that growing up, literally when a hurricane or a storm is coming, it's simply like, oh, go buy water, go buy batteries and so forth. I found like the preparedness was very superficial. And also even our response. So for us, we've taken a really, in the last 3 years, I will say, we've taken an approach where before we didn't necessarily integrate disaster risk preparedness into our everyday operations, which goes back to financing. And what we realized is when a storm or a hurricane hits, you naturally see a dramatic drop in participation in our membership. Obviously, because when you become almost like a community, trust is built. And there's also an expectation for that same community to show up when you need them the most. So from 2022, we started slowly redirecting our restricted funding at that. About 3% of it went to disaster response. That was in St. Lucia. St. Lucia had 90 minutes of rain in the north of the island that caused $7 million in damages. Then in 2023, we had, I think it was Tropical Storm Brett. Again, farmers were hit, most of them without insurance. That was 5% of our restricted budget that we had to find ways to basically redivert. Then in 2024, thankfully, we got trained internally in cash and voucher assistance with Care International and CALP, and we were prepared. We started essentially, one of the areas was that we actually now have a disaster fund. It's not a huge fund, but it's something that we know we have to replenish every year, because storms and hurricanes, we can't pray that it won't happen. It will. For us right now, it's how soon we can bounce back. The other thing that I will say in the Caribbean is we have, again, a very traditional response in terms of for disasters. Going back to our non-communicable diseases, we have a habit of, we're going to give hampers that are full usually of sugar and of flour. And when you have communities and families that are suffering from diabetes, from hypertension, you're actually adding to the problem. And it's also a question of dignity. It's almost like in most other countries, cash and voucher is used. But it's almost like as if we don't trust our own people to basically use this money wisely. So we've been trying to shift that narrative. And what we've been seeing is that our families that are our members, we call them our families, but the bounce back is quicker. The resilience you're seeing is stronger, and that you see the types of choices that they're influencing us. For example, you're seeing areas where the need may be 30% their farm, but 70% a child's education, because everything got washed away in a flood. So again, I think it's really trying to reorient ourselves, especially when it comes to response, but also trying to be a little closer to the needle and closer to our communities when it comes to disasters and how we actually prepare them. It's not just water and batteries. It's also knowing where the closest shelters are. It's also understanding what are the dynamics when you're in a shelter, when you're a young woman or a young man and so forth. And also I will add the last part, the biggest part that we don't talk about in terms of climate change is our impacts on mental health. Look at our Caribbean societies, the violence, the things that are erupting. There is a direct relation. And even that with Helen's daughters, that's how we started our telecounseling program. It was after Hurricane Beryl and we continued on. So I'll stop there because I'm very passionate about this, but thank you for asking, Angela.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Keithlin. Ashley, you had a hand up in relation to this. Did you still want to come in?
I'll just
No pressure.
I'll just comment briefly. I totally agree with what Keithlin would have mentioned, and I think I can touch on the mental health component. I think I believe that mental health and disaster risk reduction are deeply interconnected. I believe that across the Caribbean, there needs to be a heightened level of psychosocial support after a disaster for persons from within groupings that have been impacted significantly. I even think even here in Barbados, with Hurricane Beryl, that would have affected us. In speaking with the fishermen from the fisher folk community who was impacted and devastated as a result, that had an impact on their overall livelihoods. And when persons don't know where their next income is coming from, especially those single mothers or those fisher women who were the only breadwinner of their household, don't know where their next meal is going or how their children are going to survive within school environments, there really needs to be that heightened level of psychosocial support for persons to know or provide further guidance on how to cope better with the impacts of those natural or extreme weather events that our Caribbean region has been facing. But last year, through the Ashley Foundation, we would have started a new program entitled Safe Coast BIM, whereby it looked at training young persons from 6 different secondary schools on disaster risk response. And it was a pilot project in collaboration with the Barbados Meteorological Services, the Department of Emergency Management, and also the Barbados Defense Force. And we did research on the particular topic. And what we've recognized is that schools in Barbados many of the schools who were participating in the program don't have active environmental clubs. And that's because of lack of financing specifically. A lot of the schools want to implement environmental related projects, but don't have the capital to assist with extracurricular environmental activities that the students may want to implement. Thus, they may have to do additional support from private sector or other community groups. And at most of the times when they approach persons, they have already tapped into existing funding that is already allocated for projects. But we've also found that a lot of the schools in Barbados don't have emergency preparedness plans. And that was a shocker for us when we were investigating. So the purpose of the program was to build young people to become disaster prepared. And a lot of the district emergency organizations as well, and the district emergency officers were kind of like in the older bracket. So when looking at disaster response as well, I think it comes back to equipping what we call the future generation with the necessary guidance to form part of these to become community disaster emergency officers so that they themselves can know how to educate or sensitize their communities. One. So what we did at the ending of the program was also to provide small grants to schools to have a disaster preparedness club within their school as well, to act as the sensitization and awareness body. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I
Angela,
think,
I just want to come in here
oh,
for a
sure.
bit
We're
because
over
this is
time, but
really,
everybody's still here. So please go ahead for, we can take a couple more minutes. Please go ahead.
yes, because this is really an interconnective topic that I really don't think we touch on enough. And Keithlin and Ashley would have touched on almost every aspect I want to allude to. So I adopt everything they've said and I share the same sentiments. But I just want to add that we have to have almost a different approach where it's not just authorities and counselors and psychologists, but it's also training peers to be a peer, right? And I think I know last year when I presented to the UNICEF executive board, one of the things that I said in my speech is, hey, we need psychosocial support after these climate I
Events.
just lost my train of thought. Events, right? And we just wrapped up I Support My Friends UNICEF Parents Events at Undergraduates, and I'm so proud of the initiative. That's where we really train our first responders, especially our counselors and our psychologists, how we deal with the increased mental health support for youth after a disaster, right? And I just want to touch on also the exploitation and abuse. Because when we displace our young girls into shelters where they share a space with a 67-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman, well, not a 90-year or 70-year-old woman, they're no more exposed to sexual abuse and harassment, right? So what strategies are we putting in place? Do we now have a shelter just for girls of a specific age? We don't have these initiatives, at least not in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? So I think that's really something that we need to think about, where we think about our young girls and their vulnerability. Of course, mental health support, access, resources, and so on. But especially when it comes to violence against women and young girls, right? It literally puts them in the environment that fosters those sorts of events, right? So I just wanted to point that out as well.
No, thank you. I think that was a well-placed intervention. You all have touched on such a wide variety of elements that intersect with this conversation. And I want to thank you for bringing all of that to the table. What this does in my mind is to say that we have to have more of these conversations, and we have to have more of these conversations with a wider audience, and including some of those who hold the keys to unlocking some of the opportunities, whether financial, whether technical, that will help us move some of these issues forward in a positive way. Oftentimes, we unfortunately are in a situation where things are done, but done on a small scale, and the resourcing is just not there to take it to scale. The peer training that you just mentioned, I know UNICEF has been doing that across the region in a number of spaces. The work with young people in trying to better understand climate change and its impacts, and working with the disaster management organizations in the region, again, that's something that can be expanded upon and taken to another level. But oftentimes we struggle with a lack of resources. The issues are real. They're not going away. As a matter of fact, they're becoming more complex because there's a multiplier effect occurring. when we look at all of the different social issues that we are grappling with, and the intersection with things like violence and vulnerability to violence are all very real. So there's much more to discuss, much more to unpack, and I hope that we can find other opportunities to do this, so that we can continue to figure out some solutions. You know, I think the next time we have a discussion like this, I want it to focus on some possible solutions that perhaps we can take into some of the spaces like the COP, like some of these executive board meetings, to represent our region's interests and the role and vulnerability that our young people face, sorry. So with that being said, I just want to thank all of you, our panelists, our audience participants, for joining us this evening. I know we didn't have a long time to promote this, to get wider participation, but I am grateful that you were here and you stayed for the duration. I am very appreciative of our panelists who exuberantly said yes, 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 they want to be a part of this. And I think you will join me, if you will please mute your mics if possible, or if by just a show of hands, turn on your cameras, everyone, and just show hands in support, to thank all of our panelists for their contributions, to thank our able moderator, Yemi, for her guidance throughout this discussion. Thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. Sharon Carter-Burke is online. Sharon, is it possible for you to grab a screenshot of all of our photos, of our images on screen? Debbie, I see there's a Debbie that has her hand raised. I don't know if we could unmute her. But Jawara or Sharon, if you could just take a photo of everyone who's on screen, that would be great. And Debbie, do you still wish to ask a question before we quickly wrap up? Jawara, are you there?
Yes, but I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, the hand is gone. Can you possibly take a photo for us?
Yes, I have done already.
Oh, look at you. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you on behalf of the UN Women Multi-Country Office for the Caribbean, and I wish you all the best. Continue to shine brightly. We are supporting you. We're cheering you on, and we will find ways to stay connected. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Yemi.